Welcome to the Audiation in the Wild podcast with your hosts, Beau Taillefer and Eric Rasmussen. Season 2, Episode 12, Essential Functions, Part 2.
Okay, so Eric, we're going to talk about essential functions today. It's been a while since we talked about this topic, but I think it's really important for NLT, but also kind of MLT plus your work really highlights the usefulness of this concept.
Yeah, it's like we're session number 50.
Nice.
This is our 50th podcast, and this was probably half that ago. So 25 episodes ago, we did essential functions. It's like the best way to establish tonality, right? The best way to understand tonality is through functions, not tonal patterns, and just resting tone by itself. There's more to it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's what we covered in the last episode. I don't remember. I have to go back and listen to it, but let's expand on what we did.
So can we do some practical examples? So if you are going to establish like major, why do you like to use like something like this rather than something like this?
How much brain power did I need for the second one?
Yeah.
Just make it simple, and 1-5-1, or 1-4-5-1 if you really want to, but just 1-5-1 will do it.
Yep.
And it's simple and it's quick, and if you've got a harmony producing instrument, do that instead of if you're by yourself and you don't have an instrument under you, then go ahead and do the typical Gordon, melodic sequence.
Something like that.
Yeah, it's just fine. It establishes, but again, it takes more effort to audiate that than it does 1-5-1. 1-5-1 is more solid than anything.
I like the idea of students practicing listening to harmony as a way to establish tonality too, because we're talking about three separate ways to establish tonality. This kind of that way, and then the chords as tonal patterns. Something like that, or
without he would say to establish tonality without rhythm.
So like this. Something that has the same rhythm over all the tonal patterns.
No, just even without rhythm, just no rhythm. Just don't care when they come.
Sure.
Just so no timing. And then ready, then say ready, go, right?
Yep.
Or do, day, do, or whatever you want to do to get them to start. But I always just breathe. I always just play 1-5-1 and I breathe. And that's how I tell kids to start. I teach them to just breathe with me. And that.
Sure. Yeah.
And that does it. So I don't start kids other than to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
Establish tonality using the essential functions and then breathe. And that's how I start songs. And I think it's, unless there's an introduction.
Okay.
The kids can go off the introduction.
Mm-hmm. So another part of this topic of essential functions is how, these tonalities that we're playing in and that we're playing for our students, they all have a set of essential functions that will help someone audiate that tonality clearly if you play those. Now, major and minor have this phenomenon where you can really establish the tonality with just two. 1 and 5 can do it. I notice I can establish major myself with just 1 and 4, or very easily, but I think 1 and 5 is going to be a lot stronger. But if you do 1, 4, and 5, it cements it in quite well. But some of these other tonalities, I don't think a lot of musicians grow up learning the essential functions for them, and I see this a lot in the guitar space where people are learning to play in Lydian and in Dorian, but they don't actually know what a Lydian chord progression would be like, or a Dorian chord progression, and that to me is a problem, because how are you going to intelligently compose and play and create if you don't hear the functions that actually make Dorian sound like Dorian?
Yeah, well, you need the tonic, the subtonic, and you got to have the subdominant Just got to have those three. And same with Aeolian, because if you don't have the subdominant, then you don't know what function that is, whether it's a minor 4-chord or a major 4-chord.
Can I play what you're describing here?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So you're describing this. If we have, so I'm playing a minor 1 with a subtonic, but we don't know if we're in Dorian or Aeolian yet because we don't know what the 4-chord sounds like. So if I was in Dorian, it might go. But if I'm in minor, so there's really this one tone that's helping us hear the difference.
Yeah, and so in minor, it's possible you have the subtonic in there, right? But you also have the dominant. And in Aeolian, you just almost never play the dominant. Well, you can't play the dominant, like a dominant sound. You could play it, if you're an Aeolian, then the E minor.
Which actually is a really cool sound.
It's fine. It's not essential because what establishes it better is the 4-chord, and then the 7-chord. So the subtonic and the subdominant.
I feel that way about Dorian. I mean, that 4-chord in Dorian, the major 4-chord, it just, if you have a tonic, minor tonic, and a 4-chord that's major, it just gives away Dorian. I mean, there's nothing else it can be, unless you hear it as 2-5 in major or something like that.
Yeah. Well, the conventional cadence is the subtonic tonic, but you've got to have the 4-chord in the background, or you don't know if you're Aeolian or Dorian, like you said. But in minor, you also have that subtonic, but it always has that dominant sound, like major flat 7 sound.
Mm-hmm. So it's cool if you have if you are a piano player or a guitar player. It's great to have these essential functions really well mapped out and easily played on your instrument, both for helping your students establish the tonality, but it'll really help your own development on those instruments.
Yeah, ukulele's really popular right now too. A lot of classrooms are getting ukuleles, not just teachers. But get the kids to play those essential functions.
And you can really go to town on the ukulele with this because some of these chords are so easy to play. Like, it's perfect for ukulele. I mean, D minor, C, and F, or D minor, C, and G. Sorry, for playing in Dorian, in D Dorian. They're very easy to play. I mean, after a little bit of instruction, and so you can. One of the reasons I like doing relative tonalities, like how Gordon is recommending, is that for an instrument like ukulele, you only need a few chords to play in pretty much every tonality, which is quite amazing. I mean, if you go the parallel tonality route, you have to learn a lot of chords just to play the basic tonalities.
Yeah, CFG. That covers a bunch.
Yeah, CFG. So what about Phrygian? We didn't talk about Mixolydian either, but let's talk about these two.
Well, let's go through them in order. I think major and minor, everybody kind of understands 1-5-1 or 1-4-5-1. Mm-hmm. I think it's more important to have that 4-chord in the minor than it is to have the subdominant or the 4-chord in the major. I think just because it has that fa mi, you need that fa mi la. That fa mi really establishes a minor better than just 1-5.
Yeah,
I just find that more essential than the subdominant and major. But if you've got a tune that doesn't have any subdominant in it at all, then don't need to set up the 4-chord ahead of time. You can, but it's not it's not going to be something in the tune. But mostly, if it is, go ahead. It's good, but you don't need to. And if you want to set up minor more strongly, and the same thing is for major, it's subdominant, does make it a little bit more strong.
Sure.
But you don't need it. So there's major and minor. Now, when you go to Dorian, you got to have the 4-chord and the 7-chord. And that's really it. There's nothing else that's helps it get stronger than those two. So tonic, subdominant, and subtonic. And exactly the same for Mixolydian. Tonic, subdominant, and subtonic. And you don't need anything else. There's nothing else that'll make it stronger. In fact, if you start to add stuff to these, it kind of pulls away from how strong Dorian is.
So can I play the difference between Dorian and Mixolydian? Because they're so useful for comparing with each other. They're so
Yeah,
similar.
just listen to the tonics,
So
and everything else is the same.
Here's Dorian. If I do Mixolydian. So they actually share a lot of the same stuff. It's just the tonic chord is either major or minor.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's one where, you know, I've constantly mentioned this on the podcast. Learning relative tonalities is extremely useful. I'm not advocating abandoning that, but once you get to a certain point, especially once you're playing instruments and stuff, comparing parallel Dorian to parallel Mixolydian, it just, you see it on your instrument, you're like, oh my god, they're the same thing. They're like almost the exact same thing. And you should learn to do this through your audiation, but you should also learn to see this on your instrument theoretically at some point when it's appropriate. There's a lot of caveats behind that. Which
Yeah, you're giving them preparation. You don't want to blind these kids, or maybe you do for some of, put a blindfold on them for some things. That's fun to do, because they might be using their eyes to get away from their ear. But if they're singing in tune, then yeah, let them get the it's like the preparation or the learning sequence before. That'll lead them eventually to theory.
Exactly, and I really don't think there's anything wrong with teaching some theory here and there, as long as you make it rooted to what they're audiating. So like when I teach these functions by rote in parallel, either Dorian and Mixolydian, I will just make sure, like, hey, can you play that by rote? And then also, when I play it by rote, can you tell me which one I played? Because if they're telling me which one I played when they're just listening to me and they can't see it on the piano, and I know their answer is consistent and confident, I know they're naming it based off what they actually audiate and not just some arbitrary, theoretical information. Well, the one chord was major because I know what a major chord looks like on my piano. I need them to tell me from some kind of listening, that they identify what I'm saying. And then in that case, I don't mind a little bit of theory smuggled in here and there. But you got to be careful because you can get off the rails pretty fast if you're not rooting it to what they're audiating.
Yeah, I think it's cool that they have the visual experience and can see, I'm just one black note different, whether it's up from a white note to get a major sound or down from a black note to get a minor sound, or depends on, what keyality you're in, of course. That it's just, same hand position, probably, it's just it's right there to see, and it makes sense to them visually, of course, after they've learned to be able to audiate those tonalities.
Yep.
When you put them in parallel, like you're saying. So that's not to start with. I don't start parallel at all. I like to start relative.
Yeah, I've been through different experiments with different students. I've started some students relative, some students parallel, and I think as long as you're very careful and conscious and intentional about what you do, they're both fine to do. But the starting with parallel has some things you have to be very cautious about to not confuse people with, but it's very much doable. So there's different ways about it. I think at some point, eventually, your students should be able to, once we're kind of air quote done with our students, we want them to be able to play in parallel tonalities and relative tonalities. So they're both eventually goals anyway. It just depends how you want to sequence stuff.
Yeah, and that's where I'm pretty strong about relative before the parallel. But you said, with a visual instrument, it's kind of easy to describe it, and they can play their own listening vocabulary and give them a chance to make little ditties of their own, compose or create or explore even, using those two 5-finger patterns, whether it's a major scale or a minor scale from do to so or la to mi.
Yeah, and really, like, I love doing it the relative way. I'm never only doing parallel with people. I'm always doing relative, but the question is whether I'm adding the parallel and where I add it. But I mean, my whole reasoning for even experimenting with the parallel thing was, is it parallel that's wrong, or are people just not teaching parallel tonalities off of audiation? And I found that was pretty much the case. When people use parallel tonalities kind of in the wild, a lot of people aren't even using audiation. They're purely teaching it theoretically. So it is possible to do it more in line with Gordon. But, as Gordon noted, there are just some things you learn in your audiation through relative tonalities that you can't learn as effectively with parallel. It's just the way it is. So, I mean, we had that... Eric, what was that jazz teacher's name that said, like, Coltrane was studying? He was using intervals, movable do, and fixed do. And pitch letters. I can't remember the guy's name. Do you remember his name?
Sandoli. Dennis.
Sandoli. Yeah, so apparently Coltrane was using movable do, fixed do, pitch letters, and intervals. And, I mean, who knows? Maybe he would have been fine with any of those or none of those. But I find that fascinating that he did.
Yeah. You're talking like somebody who's training Coltrane, and this is into the 50s and 60s. It's like, sure. This is who he's studying with in Philadelphia. Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you probably could have thrown everything at him, and he would have, take the next 28 hours and not eaten or slept.
I mean, this is where I'd like to do some research. Like, what if I teach someone to play piano and I start them with parallel and relative, pretty early on in the process? Like, what happens after 3 years of piano instruction to groups that have parallels smuggled in? Because I don't doubt that Gordon is right that relative needs to be in there, absolutely. But I guess
it's easier for children, and at some point, I think if you're dealing with 10-year-olds and up, there's a little bit more. You're a little bit higher up in the food chain for your brain to figure out things and to draw inferences easier.
Well, the topic of inference is the whole reason that I'm even advocating for learning some stuff parallel, because there are inferences you can draw from that you can't as easily draw from relative. I mean, in terms of the functions with Dorian and Mixolydian, if you do them parallel, it's just like, oh, they're the same functions. It's just like you don't even have to think at all. It's just like you look at your instrument and you hear it. It's like the same thing. So, I mean, that's one case where the parallel helps the inference. But the inferences that we usually want to generate are the fact that tonalities have different resting tones, but they are kind of related to each other in some way, and that's where relative tonality shines with this stuff.
Yeah. So let's get back. You were saying Phrygian, and I like to do Phrygian. I do Aeolian, so major, minor, Dorian, Mixolydian, and then I mix those four up. Mm-hmm. Compare major to Mixolydian, compare minor to Dorian, and then also, Dorian to Mixolydian, of course, and Dorian to major, Mixolydian to minor. You want to get those really solid before you move on, because you really want the next tonality to stand out. And Aeolians doesn't stand out as well because it's so close to minor and it's so close to Dorian. Mm-hmm. So I kind of like to save that one. But of course we're doing songs in them, of course, and you do your tonal patterns in them, of course. But I'll tend to introduce those, after I do Lydian and Phrygian. So in Phrygian, you don't need all three chords, four chords, because there's the subtonic, the supertonic, and the subdominant, and of course the tonic.
It's a supertonic there. Supertonic and the subtonic really both give it away, whichever one you want. But supertonic is often found more in the wild. So you'll hear tonic, and hear that a lot, just all over the place. I hear that more than tonic, subtonic.
Yeah.
Do you find that as well? Or not necessarily?
Not in the tunes that either I've written or the tunes that I've done, out of Gordon's repertoire. I don't know that
Interesting.
supertonic is that important. It's a different sound. Instead of having tonic, subtonic, and subdominant all be minor sounds, see, those are all minor chords. So when you add the supertonic, it's really like bing, something shiny.
I played the wrong supertonic. I played major supertonic earlier. Sorry, or major subtonic earlier.
Yeah, I'm tired. I'm not.
It's okay.
I'm really tired.
We'll give you a pass. I was testing you.
You're throwing it at me.
But
I had 4 hours of sleep, and then I taught 3 hours this morning. So
nice.
I'm toast. No, I should have caught it. I'm mad at myself now. But at any rate, so you've got 3 minor chords that are essential functions when you're in Phrygian, which is really cool to just stay in this somber mode kind of thing, if you want to call it that.
Yep. Yeah, it is quite somber. It's it's an extra tad more hopeless than just regular minor.
But no, it's really nice to have that major chord a half step away from tonic, and that's it's really powerful, maybe almost as powerful as the subtonic.
Yeah, it's funny. In my mind, the supertonic is like, when I think of Phrygian, that's actually the one chord I think of like the most, is that that major chord a half step above the root. And
I don't argue with to say that I'm right, that the subtonic is better or whatever, because I think it's a function of your listening vocabulary or your composing vocabulary, whatever you've used.
My metal background gives me a lot of listening vocabulary like this. It's like...
Yeah, there you go.
So whenever these bands play in Phrygian, they just hammer on that supertonic like that. That's probably why I feel like that. Yeah, I just always hear that. So
then, now my question to you then, let's go from Phrygian, because I think we've hammered that. Lydian. I have people that get a little crazy if you do the dominant in Lydian.
Mm-hmm.
And I always thought it was fine. But people start to think that supertonic in Lydian is a 5/5 chord. Well, it is in major.
Exactly.
But if you never get to, a subdominant chord in major, then if you're hammering tonic, supertonic, you don't necessarily need that dominant. And that to me is just fa,
See, the 5 chord here is fine.
Resting tone fa.
The 5 chord here is fine.
Yeah, I think so too.
If you don't have the 5 chord,
but if you go 2-5-1,
yeah,
then you've ruined, right? It's not a dominant 7.
So I know what's happening here. There, like you were saying, people are hearing this. They're hearing this.
Yeah.
They're hearing the 2 chord in Lydian as like a big 5, or sorry, big 2. But so I think there's that can happen. But I also think a lot of people that think they're playing in Lydian are actually playing on the 6 chord in minor, and they're audiating La as the resting tone, but they just keep playing. They just keep playing the 6 to the 7, or the 6 to the subtonic, or whatever you want to call these chords, and that's another thing that makes Lydian not sound like a correct tonality. And I think that happens to people a lot more than they are even aware of. Because if you're hearing it like that, and then you play this 5 chord, does this sound like the resting tone? It does to me right now, but a lot of people feel like this is the resting tone. Um, they think La is the resting tone, and that I think is very common for Lydian.
So Phrygian, Phrygian is pretty objective, right? Major, minor, very objective. Mixed Lydian and Dorian aren't quite as objective. Just a little bit under that. And then Lydian, when you get to that, you really got to be careful or you're going to lose Lydian. It's fragile.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And then I don't know what to do with Locrian. I'm still like, play your tune. I really like this tune, but it's like the only one that I like in Locrian.
How did it go?
Now, what are your essential functions?
Okay, so you have a diminished one chord. So that's one in supertonic right there, or subtonic.
Mm-hmm. Subtonic.
This I think this is more important than the subtonic. So this is just the 5 chord, which is weird because I don't think a lot of people think about playing the 5 chord in Locrian. It's a tritone away from the resting tone.
It doesn't seem to be what most MLT practitioners. I haven't seen it written down the way you think of it.
I was born in the jungle, Eric. This is my own.
You're born in the wild.
No, seriously, I don't agree with Gordon's essential functions on Locrian. For this fact, he's missing the 5 chord in Locrian. And it doesn't behave like a normal 5 chord. It actually feels more like you're playing a 4 chord, which is weird.
Why do they think the 3 chord?
I don't know. I don't understand.
I don't get that. I don't get it. Yeah. But I don't get Locrian either. So
the 3 chord in Locrian, so if I go, this just sounds like, it just sounds like part of the 1 chord. It just sounds like the upper part of the 1 chord. But so I think in Locrian you need subtonic, and it's unfortunate that you'd have to call it the dominant because it doesn't behave like a dominant chord. So if like I was playing a blues in Locrian, I would go. So that holds together quite well, but the trick here is I'm using the dominant or the chord off fa in Locrian where I would normally put the 4 chord. And so this is something odd that I haven't heard really anyone talk about, but the dominant in Locrian doesn't behave like an actual dominant chord. You need to use the subtonic like that. If you do that, the whole thing kind of comes to life. And so this is an example of how my own study has been influenced with my conversations with Eric. We talked about essential functions, and I went back and said, well, I don't really know how I feel about the essential functions in Locrian. And I started discovering this, because you should have 2 or 3 that kind of bring it out. And what's wild about this is Locrian actually has more, in my mind, that are air quote essential than Lydian. Because Locrian's normally thought of as like even weirder than Lydian. But Lydian, for me, I just need those 2. Maybe the dominant, but I just need those. It's
not hammered with the 2, but it's fine without them.
So,
let me say this to be on the record about it. I'm not anti-Locrian. I think it's really useful. I'm not dissing people. I just don't enjoy getting in and where I think it's really useful is like audiating Locrian when I'm in major or audiating another tonality while you're still in major. Not that you're establishing it, but like when you're playing some functions, it's like it's cool to have that in the background. I think it's really cool, especially Locrian, really cool when you're getting into some of the jazz functions. You got to know Locrian, or these diminished sounds that that are floating in between other tonalities, usually major, minor, or major and another major, or minor and another minor, or whatever. And that Locrian sits right well in between them. So I just don't get, I'm not rested. And other people can rest on that diminished sound, and I'm never rested.
Yeah, I think the problem with the resting on the diminished sound, you got to be very careful. Because normally when you play a tonic chord, the whole function can ground you, but you have to be careful in Locrian the way you hear fa, because fa doesn't function like a normal, like in major you have do and so, but in Locrian you do not have ti and fa. Like they don't reinforce each other the same way. So you have to really establish the tonality with just ti.
Yep.
Like this to me doesn't feel like it wants to take me back to the tonic.
Yeah.
But that kind of gives me.
So it's more of a melodic mode than it is a harmonic function mode. Maybe it's better.
I don't know, these three functions, they definitely make me feel rooted. I mean, Locrian can be compared really well to Phrygian. Like they can be compared so well to each other.
Yeah, I'm more interested in expanding or adding extra tones to the functions and all the other tonalities more than I am trying to get myself to do Locrian tunes and stuff. And, of course, I'm only going up to second grade or third grade with my kids. So I got all of the functions, all the tonalities except Locrian, and we're well into that this year. And we just hit midway a couple of weeks ago. And they've got a big listening vocabulary, all the tonalities, big listening tonality. And how I teach tonalities is through essential functions, not just through my gimmicky. So I have songs that, did I tell you this one? I think I might have, or I might have even put it on the podcast earlier. I forget how much we talk. Here I go. You're gonna like this, guys. This is going in the next book. So what you need to know is that Ian and Jack live next door, and another neighbor. What's the other neighbor's name? Oh, Ming. I don't think I can do it without looking at my notes. Where is it? But I'll just do the first phrase.
Sure.
Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door. They're the kids who live next door. Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door. Ian and Jack, the kids who live next door. Ian and Jack. See?
Yeah.
And then, anyway, that's all I'll do because I forget the other phrases. But I think I did put that on the podcast before.
I think you brought it up on the episode about words and rhythms.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, but I got these little gimmicks to help kids remember, the tonalities.
They're a type of mnemonic. They're helping you remember the tonality with the words of the song. It's genius.
Yeah. After they already can recognize them.
Yep.
Now I'm giving the name. So they're already recognizing, like, that tonality is for this song and this song and this song and this song. Mm-hmm. And I do mashups of all those songs that are in Dorian to put them all together. Right? And then I sit there and hammer the tonic and say that's tonic major. And I hammer the tonic and I say that's another tonic, but we're in mixolydian, but it has the same sound. Which one is this? Tonic major or tonic mixolydian? It's like, which one? And they look at me like, well, they're the same. How do you make them? How come this is major and this is mixolydian? The same tonic. It's the same sound. And then when you put the functions around it, which I learned from a first grader 10 years ago.
That's wild.
Like, he's like, we don't know what it is until you put the functions around it.
So that's what happened when I was teaching this girl to play Mary Had a Little Lamb with functions that would imply major, minor, and mixolydian. When I would play the major one, and I would just play the tonic chord. I didn't play the rest of the song. I would say, how do we know if we're in major Mixolydian or major Mary Had a Little Lamb and Mixolydian Mary Had a Little Lamb? She's like, we don't know yet. She's like, I haven't heard enough chords to tell you the answer. And that's such an insane answer for a kid to give unprompted, right? They're not being coached to say that, but they literally just are waiting for more information to be able to even tell you what they're audiating.
Yeah.
But
yeah, and what's cool is like, well, here's resting tone X, and they say, well, I wonder what the name of that is. They start to ask you, I want the names of the tonalities.
And this makes sense that this would happen, because if you teach resting tone do and la, and then maybe get into a third one like re, they're using tonal syllables for other things, like tonal patterns and other things. And then all of a sudden they're like, well, we don't have a tonality that starts on mi yet. What would that sound like? They start to infer that it's possible. And that's the power of the relative la-based minor movable do, is that type of inference becomes like normal for a kid that's 4 to do. Right? I mean, that's the power of it. They start, hey, it's got to be another one here. So,
yeah.
I mean, this conversation can go pretty deep.
Yeah,
it's remarkable how simple it can be, though. 2 or 3 chords,
Yeah. It ties into the last episode, too. So if you haven't heard the last episode, go back about adding tones to your functions, or adding melody notes by tones, and then adding, the opposite, vice versa.
Mm-hmm. All right, Eric. Well, I think that's good for today. Till next time.
That's good. All right. Thank you.